Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Vaishnavi Shukla from Marketing here at A+FI. Today I'm thrilled to introduce our CEO Neeraj Garg, who is an experienced Salesforce professional. For 20 years, Neeraj has worked alongside a multi-talented team to help associations and nonprofits drive digital transformation within their organization, enabling them to be more innovative, agile, and member-centric. Now, before we move ahead, let's walk through a few housekeeping notes. This webinar will be recorded, so everyone will be muted. You can ask questions throughout the webinar using the chat facility or using the Q&A part of the webinar. Be assured that we'll attend to all your questions. Additionally, we'll also share this webinar recording through email at the earliest. Now, today in this webinar, Neeraj will walk us through common pitfalls during Salesforce migration and how to avoid these data migration disasters. Now, without any further delay, let's move ahead.
Thank you, Vaishnavi. And I again welcome you all to this webinar. Today's webinar is more about how you can avoid pitfalls while you're doing data migration. So we are going to talk about 7 main pitfalls based on our experience on which you should actually avoid when you are actually doing a data migration. So I welcome you all again, and I think let's get started. So these are the 3 data migration misconceptions that most of us have about data migration, right? First is that we need to migrate data. So just let's do that in the live system or the production system in which we have to do it, right? Because that will save time. It would be faster. We don't have to waste time in doing the data migration in the sandbox first and then in the live system. So let's just copy it to the source system where we think we have to copy it, and the whole system would be faster. I think the second myth that we have is migration is just transferring data from one place to another. So you copy the data from one place and then just put it in another place where you want to copy it, and that's it, right? And the third and the most important misconception that we all have is that the data which we are actually migrating from one system to another system is actually good. When I say good data, I mean that there are no missing records in it. The dates or the data is all consistent. There is no inconsistent data. Data is all valid. All data has to be migrated. So we assume that all the data that we are migrating is actually good, useful, and we just have to copy it from one system to another. So we will talk about these myths and how they actually put us into pitfalls, which we should actually avoid. Okay. So let's move to the things that we should avoid in data migration. Now, I think the first and the foremost thing is that we don't treat data migration as a separate project. Okay. We think that data migration is, as I talked about, just a click of a button. So you just have to click a push one button and all the data migration tool will actually take care of it. And there would be predefined mappings on the target system. And you just click a button and all the data will be migrated. Okay, which is actually not the case. And if we need to do data migration, we need to actually treat it as a separate project that has to be planned, that has to be budgeted, and there has to be a separate team that has to be allocated to it, right? So we have to make sure that the data plan is there. There is a separate team to it, and we have got the required budget approved for data migration. Okay, because otherwise, if you don't have a plan, we would have last minute surprises when the deadline approaches, and we will say, oh, it's all failing. Okay. Now, what should we do in a data migration plan, right? What should our plan consist of? Okay. So this is a very generic data migration framework that is applicable for any data migration. Okay, and it consists of 6 stages in which the plan, or the 6 phases in which the plan has to be divided. Now, the first phase is the governance phase, right, which you actually can see in the left-hand side. Now, what does governance stage means? Governance stage means that you should identify stakeholders and key team members who are actually going to be a part of your data migration project. And if I ask you like who are the actual key stakeholders in terms of data migration, it has to be the business users, because business users understand the data best. Okay. And obviously you have to involve other stakeholders as well, depending on who all know about that data, right? And during the governance stage, you have to set the goals as well for the project. Okay. Now, once you have got these stakeholders and you have identified the key team members and you have set the goals, the second important thing is to understand your data. Okay. We should remember one thing, that all data does not need to be migrated. It may be that we have got 100,000 records in a project, but we need to identify out of those 100,000 records, how much records have to be migrated. It may be that you talk to the business users and they say that only 50,000 records have to be migrated, rest need to be archived because it's historical data. We don't want to use it. Okay. And we just need to migrate these 50,000 records out of the 100,000 records that we are planning to migrate. Okay. So it's very important to understand your data. So what data has to be migrated, what has to be archived, and what has to be purged. Then very important is to understand the current data structure, right? Because the data structure between the two systems. So if you are migrating data maybe from Salesforce to your AMS system, maybe Fonteva or Nimble, whatever it is, you need to understand the data structure for Salesforce. You need to understand the data structure for Fonteva. Okay. And because if you don't understand the data structure, so what I mean by data structure is that a particular field may have a different structure in Salesforce data object, and it may have a completely different structure in maybe Fonteva, right? So your date of birth might be in a DD format in Salesforce. It may be in an MMDD format in Fonteva. So you need to understand the data structure, how your data is structured between the source system and the target system. And obviously, when we talk about data, we talk about objects. So we need to understand the limitations of these Salesforce objects that we are going to migrate, and we need to understand their nature. So first is governance, and then you understand your data that needs to be migrated. Then you need to actually prepare data and the destination org, right? So what do you mean by prepare data and destination org? So as we saw in the first slide, we think that all the data that we have in the source system is clean. When I say clean, it means it's not missing any records. It's not inconsistent. So what will happen is if you don't clean the data right at the source end. So let's assume that you have got 100,000 records that you need to migrate. Okay. Now, out of this 100,000 records, there are around 20,000 records which are actually missing the membership date or the date of birth of your members. So what will happen is if you just migrate the data without cleansing it, right, all those 20,000 records will actually get migrated into your source system as well. So now instead of 20,000 records, you will have 40,000 records of unclean data to deal with. And that is because we have not cleaned the data and understood the data in the first place. Okay, so you need to consolidate the data, you need to clean the data, and you need to do proper field mappings. Like I told you, uh, there are Salesforce field might be different in your source system, and the field which it maps to in AMS might be different. So you need to actually map the data, you need to clean the data, right? And you need to consolidate the data. So governance, then understand your data, and then once you have understood the data and its structure, prepare a plan and clean the data before you migrate it. Now, once you have done all these three steps, the third step would be testing, right? So plan for test data, not just testing process. So, and what we try to do when we migrate data is we don't try to use real data, right? Because we think that it's customer data or it's member data, we should not use it. But what happens is if you don't use real data, you will not be possible to see the real impact on it, right? So there may be some gaps in the real data which you might see when you are actually migrating the real data, which you might have missed during the testing stage. So try to use as much real data possible, maybe in small chunks to test out things so that you can understand the problems about the data in the initial level as well. Okay, so you don't have to actually uh, realize that your data is creating problems at the end stage. Test for not just consistency, but also usability, right? So you should see that what you are actually migrating, right, is consistent as well as usable. And for that, you need to actually involve the business users for your testing purposes because they are the owner of data. They would be the best people to tell you that the data that you are migrating is actually usable or not usable. You or your consultant team or your technical team cannot verify the consistency and the usability of data. It has to be someone from the business team who can do that. And that is why governance is very, very important and is a very important factor in the initial stage of planning. You need to identify the business stakeholders who would be involved throughout the plan in verifying, in testing, in migration, and then validating the data, right? Because when you migrate the data, right, they are the people who are going to say, yeah, this data is okay, and we can actually start using it. Because they are your success parameters. They are the ones for whom you are actually exporting data or migrating data. So you have to involve them right throughout from the governance till the all these stages of the project. And then make sure that you have got post migration activities defined in the plan itself, right? Now your post migration activities can be, maybe you might have deactivated certain validation rules before migration. You might have deactivated workflow rules and triggers because you don't want to fire emails to your client from sandbox. So you might have deactivated these things. So you make sure that you activate it post migration. Otherwise, your data migration will not be successful because triggers will not work, your workflows will not work, and your validation rules will not work. Okay, so make a list of everything that you have deactivated. So your deactivation should be in the plan, your activation should also be in the plan. And your post migration activities should also consist of something like how are you going to support your users after migration. So that plan has to be chalked out as a part of your data migration plan, because once you have migrated, your users will have issues. You need to plan it before on how you are going to take care of it. Is there a separate team who's going to look after it, right? Is it an internal team that you're going to handle? So that plan has to be there. Okay. So it's very important that we have a plan in place, and the plan should be very, very similar to this data migration framework slide that I am talking about, right? It should have all these steps because you cannot miss any of these steps because it would be fatal. Okay. And feel free to ask any questions in between if you have. if I see some questions in the chat box, Vaishnavi.
Yeah, Neeraj, we have a question. So, as you mentioned right now, how can associations make sure that this data migration framework is being followed?
Okay, I think that's a good question. So just see, uh, if you are getting the data migration work from a particular team or from an external consultant, whomever you have hired, it's very important from your end to see this kind of plan being presented to you before the migration process. If your team is saying that they don't have a plan in place and they are just going to copy the data in one go, uh, just stop that process, right? Unless you see all these stages in the project plan from the technical team who is doing it, right? Just don't go ahead with the data migration process. It would be a mess, I can assure you that. So make sure that you have got at least all these 6 steps where your technical team has identified the business for stakeholders. They have actually understood the Salesforce data. They may have questions which you need to answer. They have asked which data has to be migrated, which has to be archived, which has to be purged. They have cleaned the data before doing migration. They have done the proper field mappings. They have planned the testing process, prepared that test data in place where they are going to test it. Then how are they going to test that data through the business stakeholders? And then how are they going to migrate and validate data? And then what are the action plan they have after post migration? So if you don't have that kind of plan in place before that, don't go ahead with the data migration.
That's great.
So let's go to the second pitfall, where uh, we don't work towards a particular goal, right? So we fail to engage experts, like we talked about in the last slide, where we don't involve the business users in the migration process, because business people are the ones who truly understand the data, and therefore they are the only ones who can decide what has to be thrown away and what has to be kept, like we talked about before in the previous slide. So even if the data migration mapping is reviewed and approved by the business team, surprises can appear when this data shows up in the new system's UI. Okay, because they may say that this is not something that we told you before. So it's always important to keep them in loop and take approval from them at every stage. Failing to engage subject matter experts, which are actually very busy people, because that is what we hear from all the teams, that we are not able to get hold of them, and so let's just move on without them. But don't make that mistake. Even if they're busy, get time from them, because if you don't engage them, your whole data migration process will be a big mess. So data migration is a teamwork. It is not an individual team, individual members effort on doing it. So you have to work as a team. You have to create business requirements out of it. You have to create timelines, and you need to define weekly goals. Okay. So if you think the data migration is going to take 3 months or 4 months, which is around 16 weeks. So every week should have a goal, right? So maybe week 1 should have a goal that we will actually get the business requirements from the business users. Second week goal can be we need to identify the data structures and do field mapping. Third week goal may be that we need to identify bad data in our place, and then we need to data cleansing it, right? So create business requirements, create timelines, and have targeted weekly goals so that you can track the project, right? You cannot just leave it with the technical team and tell them that we will just see it after 4 months, right? Then I think it would be a disaster. You need to track it weekly and talk to them weekly and make sure that they are performing their weekly goals. Ask the business users what is working and what is failing to make changes on time, right? As I told you, business users are the ones who own the data, and they will tell you that this is something that is working. So it may be that you have to migrate 50,000 records. So always do that in chunks. Okay. So don't do a big bang kind of stuff. maybe just pick 2000 records or 1000 records and write a script and migrate them and ask the business users to test them out, okay, and take a sign off from them. It may be that once you migrate 1000 records, they may say that these are the 200 records that are not correct. Okay. So what that will do is it will make you understand what problems are there in that particular migration script, and you can correct that, right? So that all those errors that you may have for the left 48,000 records will not happen, right? So make small mistakes by doing small chunks of releases, right? Don't do a big bang kind of stuff, and always get that small phases signed off by business users. Encourage staff to submit their comments and suggestions because it's very, very important. And break data silos to avoid isolated teams halting the project in its track. Okay. So every team that you have involved with you should work in parallel. Okay. So that it's one project. It may be your marketing team. It may be your finance team. It may be your sales team. So everyone, and there may be stakeholders from all the teams, right? So try to break those data silos and work together for a common goal. Okay, then only data migration will be successful. Now, another mistake that we do, which is actually the pitfall 3, is we underestimate the data migration, right? We think that data migration is just copying of data from one system to another. So we underestimate the complexity of the data migration. But what we don't realize is that data migration is a time-consuming process, right? It has things there are tasks which are time-consuming, right? Which you might not see in the beginning, but they will appear later. Okay, so never underestimate data migration. Follow that plan that I talked about in the second slide, data migration framework. List down all the activities that needs to be done right from the governance till post-migration activities and estimate it properly. Okay, so you need to estimate realistically. Now, how you can estimate realistically is, first thing is make a plan, jot down all the activities that need to be done for data migration. And it's very important to understand the source data, right? And source data has to be analyzed. This cannot be automated. You have to analyze the data. You have to understand the data structures. You need to understand the complexity of the data. It may be that the data is so bad that it may take you just maybe 1.5 or 2 months just to clean that data, right? So that estimate should be in place, right? So that you know that I will just take 2 months to clean that data because the source data is pretty bad out. And how you can get that bad data sorted out, you have to talk to the business, right? Talk to them that this data is bad. Do you want to actually migrate it or should we leave it? It may be, they say that maybe there is one field which is blank, right? And which does not make sense to them. So they can just give you an exception and say that leave that field. We are okay with that field being blank, migrated to another system, right? So, but it is only the business users who can actually help you with that. Okay. Calculate the estimation based on the number of fields to be transferred from a source system to a target system. Okay. Because it's very important, number of records and the number of fields that have to be migrated from the source system to a targeted system. But estimation should be based on the number of fields that have to be transferred. And how will you know the number of fields? Only by analyzing the data structure for that source system and the target system. Unless you have analyzed that, you cannot estimate it correctly. And since I defined those 6 stages in the data migration plan, from governance to post-migration, every stage needs some time and understanding about fields and mapping and the source field to the target field. Okay. Estimate each and every stage of your data migration process, and then only you can have your data migration activity being estimated realistically. Because if you don't make a plan, you will not get the right estimates. You will say, oh, it's just 50,000 records, let's just migrate it. okay, and then it's done, and then you realize that I just estimated 2 months, but it took me around a year to do it, right? Because you didn't do your homework properly, you didn't make a plan, and since you didn't make a plan, you are not able to estimate things realistically.
Sorry to interrupt you, Neeraj, but we have a question related to this slide.
Yeah.
So, should we have a post-migration plan beforehand?
Yeah, I think you should have a post-migration plan beforehand, because one of the things that most of our clients miss is that they make the plan from governance till maybe migrating the data. But once the data has been migrated, then only the real test of your migration starts, because your users will start using the new system in place where the data has been migrated. And once they start using the new system, they will have a number of issues, right? I will not say it depends on the data migration process. It may be that their data migration is successful, but still there are some things that are left, right, which were not analyzed properly. So those issues have to be tackled, and for that, you need to understand like how you will actually support your users when your data has been migrated. I think few couple of weeks you will need more attention to your users till the things settle down, and then once they start using the system correctly and understanding the system, then you can shed the load. But you should have a proper 1 month or at least 1.5 months support for them, which is maybe just 24/7 or whatever the timing are. But that has to be there as a part of the data migration plan. If you don't plan it, then after the post migration, you will realize you don't have a team to support it, and then all the users will be frustrated and they will stop using the system. So obviously, you should have a post migration plan beforehand when you are migrating.
Okay, thank you for answering, Neeraj. And I think this is a great point to ask another question from our side, that at which stage of data migration are you in, to our attendees? And we have a poll question which is on your screen right now. So please participate and answer. We'd like to know.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's great. Thank you for answering.
Yeah, I think the poll results say that we have got 30% who are in the middle of the migration. We have got 42% who are planning to migrate in near future, and obviously 25% think that they don't have any plans to migrate. But 75% people have a plan to migrate or are in the middle of a migration. So I think it's very important to understand this, that if you are, I will share the results as well.
Yeah, we can see on a screen.
Yeah. So I think that's good to know that there are around 75% of the audience who are in the middle of the migration or who are planning to migrate in near future. So it's very important to understand how you can actually do a good migration. So I think let's move ahead. Now, we talked about the data migration plan, where we talked about understanding that data, right, and cleansing data. So this is another pitfall that everyone falls in, where we think that we ignore the data quality. Okay, so we think that all the data that we are migrating is good, and we don't need to do any kind of data analysis or data cleansing activity on the source system. So new systems have new rules which may be violated with legacy data. So if you are migrating from a legacy system to another system, the rules might have changed. Okay. So let's take an example. Contact email can be mandatory in the new system, but not in a 20-year-old legacy system or in any other system, right? So suppose you are migrating from one system to another, and the source system, in the source system, contact email is not mandatory. Okay. But in the target system, it's mandatory. So what will happen is there will be huge amount of blank contact emails lying in the source system because it was not mandatory there. But when you actually migrate to the target system where it's mandatory, your data migration process will fail because it is going to expect the contact email in the target system and it is going to show you errors and it will ask you for that contact email. Now, why will this happen? Because we have not analyzed and done a proper field mapping. Okay, we have not made sure that every mandatory field in the target system has a value in the source system, and we are actually filling that value in the source system. We are filling in all the contact emails in the source system, because if we don't do that, we are going to fall in a trap, and that would be a waste of time because you have run your scripts. Now you realize you've got errors. Now you're going to go back, correct your records, and then do it again, right? Or the best thing would have happened is you would have analyzed your data, cleaned your data. When I say clean your data, you should have added contact emails in the mandatory field and then migrated it to the new system. That would have saved time initially. Okay. Otherwise, you are going to get into a massive loop where it is non-ending. And the more the records, the larger this loop is. Okay. Now, mines can be hidden in historical data, right? So if you are just migrating it from a legacy system where there were multiple European currencies existing, they don't exist anymore, right? So Europe has got euros now. So if you are migrating from a legacy system, it would have multiple European countries, which would obviously not exist in the new system. And again, you are going to fall in a trap. Okay. So this is all about data quality. Blank fields, not existing fields. So data quality significantly influences effort. The further we go in history, the bigger mess we will discover. Okay, so it's very important that we analyze the data. Maybe if it takes 15 days, that's well and good. But we should make sure that we have analyzed it, we have found the data quality gaps. Either we fix them or we get rid of them. Okay, we just don't migrate those records which have data quality issues. And how we can get that? We just have to talk to the business users that out of these 50,000 records, these 20,000 records have data quality issues. So what do you want us to do? Should we fix them beforehand, or should we leave those 2,000 records, 20,000 records, and just move ahead with the 30,000 records that are good? Okay, so that decision depends on business, because if you've got a buy-in from them, then they will not question you at the end, right? Because they will not be expecting you to migrate those 30,000 records as well. Thus, it is very important to decide early on how much history we want to transfer into the new system. Because if we decide on maybe the business wants us to just migrate 50% of the records, that just decreases your effort by almost the half. Okay. So initially, if you have not talked to the business and you have migrated all the 100,000 records without talking to them, it would have taken you 4 or 5 months. But if you have talked to the business and they would have told you that we don't want those 50,000 records, so your effort is greatly reduced, right? Maybe not by 50%, but maybe by at least 30 to 40%. Okay. So it's very important to check the data quality before we move ahead in the data migration process. Very, very, very important, which we always miss. So we should always do a pre-migration data health check. Okay, like I talked about, pre-migration data health check is just checking the data quality of your system and make sure that we have got unused, outdated, duplicate, and correct data corrected or removed from the system at multiple stages. So that is pre-migration data health check. That should be an item in your project plan, pre-migration data health check, and then fixing of those data health check issues that we have got in the system. Those two line items should be there in your project plan. Very, very, very important. Now, I think the pitfall 5, or the most of the times we do it, but sometimes we don't. We think that we don't need to test the data at every stage, while we need to test it, right? it is great to see your plan going how you imagined it, but when migrating data, but you should not stay on cloud nine every time. Okay, that everything is working, migration is successful. That does not mean that if your records are getting migrated successfully, it does not mean that the correct data is getting migrated or all the records are getting migrated. You need to check that regularly and you have to evaluate that, right? And who is going to test it out? Your business users. Obviously, you can have your own testing team in place, but that testing team has to collaboratively work with the business team in every phase and never do a big bang. Okay, like I told you before, I'm repeating it again. Never do a big bang. Do the data migration in phases so that your testing is easier, your business users have less load to test, and they're able to help you out, right? So you have to test, evaluate, and then repeat. Okay, so very important, testing should be a critical path activity throughout the migration process, not just at the end. Okay, not just at the end. Okay, you cannot do, always avoid big bang, never do 100,000 records in one place and then do testing at the end, because it is going to take you a lot of time if you have migrated all the records in one go, and then it would be difficult for your testing team to test it out. Okay, so always do that in phases. Okay, and do it continuously and correct the data, right? So if you keep on correcting the data in different phases, you are able to correct the data as well as you are able to correct your scripts that you are running. It may be that your scripts are wrong. Okay, so it will, you can keep on correcting it till you find the right script to migrate. Goal 2, define who will test and evaluate data as well as sign off on the test results. Sign off is very, very important on the test results. Never move on to the next phase unless you've got a sign off on the test results. It may be because your technical team does not understand the data, right? They are not the business users. They don't understand business. For them, if they have migrated 50,000 records and they see 50,000 records in the source system, it's a successful migration, right? But for your business, it is not, because they will have to test the validity of the system. They have to test if the records are correct or not. Okay, so get a sign off on the test results and define who will test. Very important, define who will test. And all the time, it should be someone from the business along with your testing team who is testing it out. Okay. Goal 3, once the migration is complete, repeat testing. Okay. It has to be a continuous process. Migration is in different phases, so it has to be a continuous testing process that should happen. Migrate in chunks, test it out, get a sign off. If issues are detected, correct it, correct your data, correct your testing results, correct your migration scripts, and then move on. Okay. So goal 4, issues detected. Yes, schedule follow-up meetings with your stakeholders. Your stakeholders are only going to tell you what issues are important for them, what are not important for them. And that is how you're going to set up priority for your next phases. Goal 5, pen down lessons learned and action plans to avoid repeating same mistakes. Very important. You can't keep repeating same mistakes every time. Whenever the issues are detected, correct your scripts and then move on. Now, this is something which is related to the technical team, and obviously sometimes it happens that, and it happens regularly, right? Because you need to disable certain workflows or triggers before you migrate. Okay, because if you don't do that, it may be that there is an email trigger that happens when you are migrating data, and that will actually end up in sending unwanted mails to your members, which you don't want. So make sure that you tell your technical team to disable all this triggers and workflows, right? Because if you don't disable it, it might hamper the process in migration. So many times what happens is you don't disable and trigger, and then emails get fired to your members. They may get a renewal mail, right? Because a trigger has been fired and they will be confused. So it will be chaos. And if there is chaos, what will happen is it will hamper your data migration process, because you will have to first fix those live issues and then come back to data migration. So always avoid that. So what you will have to do is make sure to disable any active workflow before importing data. Okay. And any validation rules that are there, just check that, right? And disable them as well. Okay. So disable your workflows, disable your triggers, disable anything that is related to live system, right? And I think generally technical team asks the business users about that. But if they have not, I think as a business users, you should actually tell them these business rules and make sure that they have got that disabled. Now this full migration process, as we have seen, right, which is a 6 or 7 stage process, it's a repeatable process. Okay, you have to write scripts, run them, do testing, and then again change those scripts, again migrate chunk of data. So it's a regular process that happens, right, which is repeatable and reusable. Okay, so whenever a process is repeatable and reusable, all right, it has to be automated, because in manual migration, what you are doing is just repeating those scripts manually, which is going to cause you much more effort. Okay, so data migration is often reviewed as a one-time activity, which is not. Okay, as we have seen in the previous slides, it's not a one-time activity. It's a continuous process that will happen. So developers end up with solutions full of manual actions, hoping to execute them only once. However, having manual actions can significantly slow down your operations, because it's a repeatable process. It's the same process that we are repeating. So any process that is repeatable has to be automated for better operational efficiency and better results. It will take you much less time if you have got your data migration process automated. Right? So since migration is split into multiple waves, we have to repeat the same action multiple times. There are at least 3 migration runs for every wave: a dry run, a full data validation, and a production load, right? Make sure you at least have these 3 waves run for your data migration, right? There has to be a dry run, okay, which is a simple run where you just migrate chunk of records, do it. Then you migrate it in full, validate those data. Once you have done that full data validation in the sandbox, and your scripts are correct to run, then only upload that in production, because you are using your live system for your live users. You don't have time to shut down your systems for weeks. You can maybe shut it for a day or 2 or maybe some hours. So it's very important that your migration scripts run in production with a minimum amount of time and with complete accuracy to finish that, generally on the weekends. Okay, that can only happen if you have done at least 3 stages of migration before your actual migration, right? So it is an iterative process, and we need to make sure that we automate it, we run it in several stages, so that when we run it in production, we know it has to be correct, right? It has to be correct, because if it is not, it's an expensive affair. You spend a lot of dollars on data migration, and if it fails, it's going to cause you a lot of live issues. And if there are so many live issues, obviously it's very difficult to handle. Okay, so it's important to automate your migration if possible. There are a lot of automation migration tools that are available. There are development tools that are available. There are automated testing tools that are available in the market, or open source, which your technical team might be knowing because they are an experts on it. So we also use a lot of tools for our clients which are automated, that actually saves time. So I think these are the 7 pitfalls that we have. And if you have any questions, you can actually post in the question and answer box, and we will just answer that.
Okay, Neeraj, we do have a question. So, according to you, what is the biggest pitfall to avoid?
I think the biggest pitfall to avoid is involving the business users at all stages of the project, because they are the owners of data and you are doing data migration. So they should be involved at every stage, because if they get involved, they will actually know what is happening in the system. And when you migrate, it would not be a surprise for them, because they have seen chunks of data being migrated. They have signed off on the test data, so they are seeing what is happening, right? So it's a journey for them. It's not that they have been ignored and they just get a new system in place and they start using it. It would sound familiar to them and they would be more comfortable in using that system. So involving business stakeholders is very, very important in the data migration process.
Okay. Thank you so much, Neeraj. We also have another question. So we are experiencing a high volume of migration issues. What's the best way to control it?
Okay. So see, if you are experiencing a high number of volume of issues, that means the data migration process has not been done correctly. And if you have not got a separate team in place, I think you should deploy a separate live team who can actually handle those issues. And even if you've got a live team, it's important to understand the source of the issues so that you can fix them in one go. Okay, so it may be that you might have not done a data quality check before migrating the data. So there may be records missing. So instead of just fixing one record, it's important to understand what all other records are missing and correct them in one go. So that would actually help you in decreasing your live issues.
Okay, that's great. So if you have questions, then please drop them in the Q&A section. Okay, we have one. So what is your advice for dealing with a large number of stakeholders and getting consensus before the data?
So I think when we have got large number of stakeholders, and most of the times we have, it's important that you talk to all those stakeholders, even if it takes a bit of time to get the agreement. It's okay before starting the migration process, but it's important to get everyone on board, understand, make a plan, tell it to them, get a buy-in on the data that we need to migrate, and then move ahead. Even if it involves various stakeholders, take everyone into account. It doesn't matter how much time does it take, but it's important to get them on board, right? If you're able to at least get 75% of these stakeholders in place, I think you guarantee, I think 50% of the data migration success happens there only if you get a buy-in from them.
Okay, thank you so much, Neeraj, for taking us through all the slides and answering all the questions. I think we've been through all of them. We don't have any open questions anymore.
Okay, so that's good. And I think if we have any more questions, we at Applicify can answer them. We are a registered Salesforce consulting partner, and you can always email us at vcare@applicify.com or call us at 888-683-8281. So I think that is there. And obviously, as Vaishnavi told, this recording and this presentation will be emailed to you, right? So you can get that presentation and recording. And again, thank you so much for attending this webinar. Have a great day ahead. Bye-bye.
So I guess this is it for today's webinar, everyone. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending and actively participating. Once again, this recorded session will be mailed to each one of you. So have a great day ahead and bye.